We've had some tremendous speakers and content, all of which we do record. We're recording right now. And all of this we upload during the course of the week, takes a few days on xyztools.com. So your first note for today, and I hope you are taking notes, as one of my mentors, Jim Rohn, used to impart, is never trust your memory. Write things down. So XYZ Tools, last three letters of the alphabet, xyztools.com is where you'll be able to find this content probably by Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon, depending on technology and Keith Hooper's desire to get it up as quickly as possible. But listen, we got a lot of information to go over today. So sit back, have a cup of coffee or an extra sharp or whatever it is that you're going to consume. Have your pen and paper in hand, because you're going to get a lot of information. And our first speaker is a remarkable human being. Man, I've had a privilege to not only work with side by side now for over 2 decades, but he's also become a great friend. And he is one of the 3 original investors and founders of Immunotech Research. And JMolson is a man that has been a tremendous athlete in his life. He's a tremendously educated individual. He's a man that has just a wealth of life experience as well as business experience. And he brought that to Immunotech, helped to put together the formative part of this company that exists today for all of our benefit. And in addition to that, he also literally rode shotgun with Dr. Bunos for many, many years. And I don't think there's a singular person on the planet who had more of a relationship or spent more time with our great Dr. Bunos, our co-creator of this product. So I'm going to turn the call to John, and during the call, I'll have a couple of questions or comments for you, John. But welcome to the call, first of all. And you've got a lot to share today.
Well, a couple of thoughts. First of all, welcome everybody. It's great to be back here again. And Immunotech has been a huge part of my life. I was asked the other day by the marketing department to put together a bio for our scientific advisory board, as I'm a member of the board. And so I sat down and I said, okay, so what am I going to write about? And for the first time, I went through and did a calculation in terms of the number of papers that I contributed to putting together and publishing, as well as the patents that we applied for. And to date, it's over 30 papers and 4 patent applications. And that, again, got me to thinking, that we take a lot of things for granted at Immunotech today because we know the history. It's 25 years on, but you have to appreciate back in 1996, Dieter Beer, Dr. Bunos, myself, Chuck were meeting each other for the first time. And what was remarkable, and what Dr. Bunos talks about, serendipity, how has serendipity extended through many elements of this business? Most importantly, Dieter Beer's philosophy about how the business should be run, as well as continuing this research, because this research was a huge investment. And I'm talking, as I said to John, that we could have been the types of owners where instead of reinvesting the money we were making, because that was coming off our bottom line, reinvesting the money we were making in research, it could have gone in our pockets. But 30 articles later, and some of these studies were 7 figures, we're setting the future for what we see today. And the fact that we all philosophically, without even thinking about it, agreed to invest in that, follow Gustav, develop Gustav's work, I think is, when I look at it now, pretty remarkable that, we're all on the same wavelength. And we never even really talked about it, but we just all kind of agreed about it. And so that's, to me, is a huge testament to my partners that I was in business with.
And, John, talk about that a little bit as far as the financial investment. I mean, let's face it, not a lot happens in this world of ours without somebody writing a check. And you referenced 7 figures, but I know you and I spoke the other day about this, but yeah, feel free to share, some of the actual monetary amounts that went into these patent and the processes that, Dieter Beer and yourself and Chuck invested in.
Well, those are the direct costs. I'm not talking about the indirect costs. So the indirect costs are, if you think of my time, Jimmy's time, David Peltier's time, together with the people that I hired to help us out, you're talking in some of the studies, you're talking $2.5–3 million. And for a company that's just starting out, where you have all these pressures, this money has to go into marketing, money has to go into sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that, my partners agreed that we should be doing this, that it's important to keep building our science. And thank God we did.
Well, what's amazing about that, I've, as you well know, John, and I know most of the people on the call I probably know, or they know me. I'm April will be 38 years that I'm a network marketing person. I've been involved in the industry that long. So almost 4 decades. I go back to 1983. And I've seen a lot of companies come and go over those years. I've seen some that have succeeded very well. I've seen others that, of course, have not succeeded so well. But, Immunotech is unique because the majority of those companies that went away may have even had success for 2-3 years. They may have became the rage of the industry. But how they were founded most of the time was on the philosophy of a couple of entrepreneurs getting together and saying, let's start a company, let's do network marketing. Oh, gee, what are we going to sell? And they go down to the local Whole Foods or Sprouts or the equivalent in their community if they're selling nutrition or perhaps something else. And they knock off a product and they rebrand it. They put their label on it. And that story might hold together for a couple of years if you're really slick at marketing. But eventually the consumer figures out that they're either overpaying for the product, okay, that there's equivalent products for less money, or that the technology, the science, this isn't validated. Immunotech was 360 of that from day one. And to yourself and a Dieter and the Chuck, and obviously to Dr. Bunos, Dr. Kongshav, and the other doctors associated, it's why I joined the company, to be very honest with you. It's why other people that we introduced the company to joined the company, because we said, we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, from my standpoint, John, I didn't even know it was a network marketing company for the first few months that, my now late mother used the product because of a health condition that a doctor recommended Immunical to her. So we had no idea it was network marketing. And here I was already in network marketing, even at that time, for over a decade. And it just didn't even dawn on me because the product had so much sophistication and science to validate it. But, back to you on a question on that, John. We've done all of this research, right? I mean, you or I or anybody else on this call could probably take all the articles, all the reference points about Immunical, and probably pile them up and they'd be over our heads. And I'm 6'2", so, and you are too, I believe, John. So that'd be a pretty good pile of documents. But along those lines, 1975 to 1996, some significant things happened. So let me throw you out a couple of reference points. Dr. Luc Montagnier at Pasteur Institute. Do you want to reference a little bit of his research, if you would, for a moment?
Sure. The way to think about this is you don't get these kinds of names associated with a company unless there's real science there and a real product. An equal example of that is to be able to recruit a guy like Dr. Droog. Dr. Droog was a professor at Harvard, a member of the Max Planck Institute, a professor at the University of Heidelberg. He was head of the immunochemistry division of the German National Cancer Institute, and he faced mandatory retirement at age 65. And Dr. Droog told me that he had offers from every single pharmaceutical company you can possibly manage. And he came to Canada to work for Immunotech. A big incentive for him is that we were committed to some big studies that he wanted to do using Immunical. So you don't get these kinds of individuals, and there's been many, many physicians, some of the top institutions across North America, unless you philosophically are science-based, you're based on integrity, and also you have a product that works. And I think that's the greatest testament is we've been able to attract these kinds of people because of the product and our philosophy.
And that was one of the things that's so overwhelming. Because, sometimes you get the question from people when they look at our company and they say, well, you've been around since 1996. And then they hear that research predates us almost 20 years, right? Yes, it is 20 years, 1975, when Dr. Bunos and Dr. Kongshaven first had their first, meeting and association. And, what happened in those 20 years? And, just talking about, Dr. Droog for a moment longer. Not only did he go on to take our Immunical product and ultimately create our platinum Immunical product, but when John says the Max Planck Institute, for those of you that aren't familiar with who Max Planck was, he was a guy named Albert Einstein's mentor. Okay. So when you look at these studies that John's mentioning, and these names are thrown out, whether it's Wolf Droga or Luc Montagnier, for example, who won the Nobel Prize a number of years ago, these are heavyweights. These are not, some guy, in isolation. These are people, to John's point, that are wanted by the pharmaceutical industry and by, universities, et cetera, around the world. And they all wound up in Immunotech, not because we threw a lot of money at them, frankly, because our product was already validated and they had their specific area of research that they were interested in doing something further with. And once again, it sets us apart. It gives us a point of difference than, John, frankly, anybody else.
Just one other point. I remember another anecdote. When we were running our aging study, we were very fortunate to be able to work with a gentleman named Dr. Remy Rabassa-Lauret. And Dr. Remy Rabassa-Lauret is funded by the National Research Council of Canada, as well as the National Institute of Health in the US. I mean, he's really an esteemed researcher. And when I came in, I sat with him in his office, we were discussing the proposal. He said, John, he said, many companies come to me with a research project and, what they have is very esoteric. And, it maybe applies to, a half a percentage of the population. I said, what you're proposing and the application is so broad. And that's what's so interesting about this. And this was the aging study where we're looking at the impact of Immunical on physical performance in elderly people, which, has huge ramifications. So again, it's not just the science, it's not just the people we work with, it's also the application of these scientific projects in terms of how they can affect society.
And along those lines, John, so we talked a little bit about the history, which is remarkable to say the least, and ongoing, but, I think now we're at a point where we've kind of proved our case that Immunical certainly works and that science is certainly, evidence-based and validated around the world in so many publications. But even recently, just in the last short while since we had our last Zoomtacular, something I believe has happened in the TBI world that you wanted to share today.
Exactly. So we have 2 TBI projects. One we've published. The second one is the model is designed to look at the effect of Immunical from a prophylactic point of view. In other words, if you look at players that play impact sports, soccer, hockey, football, it's not so much the trauma, it's what's called the micro trauma. So the repeated hits on the head over time, what does that do to the brain? And, many of these players are very worried about when they retire or 40, 50, 60 years old, what's their brain going to be like? I mean, are they going to be functional? And there's a way to model this. And so after a successful first study, we initiated the second study, and the data from this second study is going to be presented at a national TBI conference this year in the US. And then the paper should be published in, let's call it the spring of 2021. So you're going to have 2 papers, one that looks at the impact of TBI, where you have induced an injury into a experimental animal. And then the second one is this one where you've modeled the injury over time to see the effect. So that's, the aspect of Immunical and brain function is we're just starting to write those chapters. So that's going to be fascinating because we also have the NCI study underway, mild cognitive impairment. And, we're working with some of the top neurologists in Canada. These neurologists are consulted by governments to set policy for unhealthy brain aging, unhealthy aging. And they're sitting as part of the research team that runs this study. And so it'll be really exciting to see what the data is when we finish the trial.
Interesting. It always amazes me when we hear about these trials, and then, you talk to people and you share with them that, we are a network marketing company, but yet we've got this incredible scientific product with all of this validation that's being studied at the highest of the high in terms of, be it academia or be it in the research world. But, John, I know you and I share a lot of information with each other that, everybody else doesn't necessarily get. But when we talk about that aging, this is something that's coming to light more and more. I'll be 60 years old this year, for example. And I remember when my dad turned 60, for example. He was an old man. He was old. He was sick. He was beat up. He was all these things. And of course, he never took Immunical. It didn't exist during his life. I look at a lot of other people that were maybe in that age group, 50, 55, 60, 65, and they were definitely progressing in the wrong direction. Not all of them, but most of them. Going back to, when your dad, my dad were the ages that, you and I roughly are now. And I think you have some advice for people as far as what Immunical will do in terms of slowing down an aging process. I know we can't make that claim, but certainly, all the elements that go into reversing time a little bit or slowing down time a little bit, I guess. But anyway, let me throw that to you if you want to go from there.
I can explain it this way. Dr. Bunos explained to me before Dieter, he was funded by Dieter Beer. He was funded by the National Research Council of Canada. And as part of receiving these grants, you're audited. And he said the most difficult concept he had to try and get across to these research was that Immunical didn't act like typically what you see interventions, where it's one cause, one effect. With Immunical, it was one cause, multiple effects. And so when we talk about aging, the research done by Dr. Bunos with regard to these mice that live 30% longer, they live longer because you're staving off age-related diseases. So you're improving the immune response. But I can tell you, Dr. Droog was an expert in aging. And I can tell you that Immunical affects the aging process in multiple ways. Now, when you're doing clinical research, you have genetics, you have environment, you have, people respond differently, but the underlying rationale with regard to Immunical and aging, it affects multiple parameters. So you're talking about the immune response, you're talking about the effect of environmental toxins over time, you're talking about liver function, you're talking about muscle function, even the brain, cardiovascular system. So it really is hitting it from multiple data points.
And John, last question on that, because the brain, and I know Dr. Gutman has shared this in the past, when they examine cadavers, of course, that the ones that have died of ALS, dementia, MS, I believe, and also, of course, Alzheimer's, seem to be devoid of glutathione. Once again, we know what our product does in terms of glutathione, but if you want to comment on that a little bit, because, once again, to that point about aging, some of these diseases may not have existed because people passed away before they got them, in theory. Right now we have people who are living, 85, 90, 95, 100 plus year old people that, and in many cases are fully functional. Some of them are even going to work every day. Some of them are doing remarkable things in aging. But, once again, along those lines, right, because of with aging creates circumstances of things with the brain that didn't exist, maybe in the prior generation that exists today, and it'll exist for our kids and our grandkids. But along those lines, John, once again, Immunical in the brain. It's so fascinating.
Well, I'll explain it this way, because a lot of people understand the model of sports. If you have a world-class athlete and you overwork that athlete to the point where they're, in Oracle's terms, overreaching, so they're playing too many minutes, They're not eating properly. They're being forced to travel because of away games. They're in hotels, so they're not sleeping well. Their resiliency is going to drop, and these athletes are more predisposed to break down. Now, the reverse is true. If you optimize their playing time, if you optimize their diet, if you optimize their recovery, they're going to be more resilient. So when I met with Dr. Schipper, who's a top neurologist who's running our MCI study, and we looked at the model of neurodegenerative disease, and his mouse model reflects exactly what happens. He said, you know, in almost all neurodegenerative diseases, in other words, that you have this increase in inflammation, and it causes all sorts of problems. And he said, you know, in almost all these different conditions, you have a precipitous drop in glutathione. So the brain becomes more vulnerable, so it becomes less resilient. So he said, boosting glutathione boosts the brain's resiliency. So you cannot eliminate the risks we face on a daily basis due to genetics, due to the environment. But what you can do is you can boost the brain's resiliency to these things. So it's a game of percentages, much like insurance. So you want to do everything you can to boost your body's capacity to mediate all the different insults you're subjected to, you know, outdoor pollution, indoor pollution, trauma, whatever. And that's the underlying concept of Immunical throughout the body, boost the body's capacity, you know, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a cancer patient, whatever, boost the body's capacity to deal with the different insults.
Incredible. Well, John, as always, I've got about 4 new notes that I didn't have in our prior discussions, because every time we talk, I learned something new. I'm sure everybody else did. And I'll give you the last word, and we're going to move on to one of those people who's remarkable in an age group that most people are retired at, that is going to give us some great information on his Immunical experience.
Well, I would just say that you got some great speakers today, so everybody get your pens and paper ready and take notes like John does.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John, as always, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stick around. We'll probably have a question or two for you at the end.
Okay.
Like we normally do, because there's so much content. I know it gets your brain working and mine as far as more questions to ask of all these remarkable people. And we really do. John is absolutely, we got an all-star lineup today. We always do, but we've got an all-star lineup. Normally we have one superstar medical person. Today we've got a number of just incredible human beings. And this next gentleman, I'm going to read a little bit about him for you. And I